Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
And now, the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton, sponsored by GEHA.
Welcome to the Federal Drive on Federal News Network. It's Friday, June 5th. I'm your host, Terry Gerton, and I'm glad you're here. Coming up on this hour of the Federal Drive, GSA updated the organizational structure of the Federal Acquisition Service on paper, but now the real work begins. Plus, CMMC has moved from planning to enforcement, and contractors are feeling it. Those stories and much more ahead on this hour of the Federal Drive. We begin with this. Agencies will soon get their first set of marching orders from President Donald Trump's executive order on artificial intelligence from earlier this week. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency is expected to issue at least one binding operational directive as soon as today to direct agencies to secure large language models. For more on the BOD and other changes expected from the AI executive order, Federal News Network's executive editor, Jason Miller, joins me now. Jason, thanks for being here.
Always a pleasure, Terry.
The president signed the AI order on Tuesday, and now we're looking at actions coming out of it. What did it address, and what actually is CISA's role in meeting those new mandates?
The executive order called, AI, innovation, and security does several things, and people can read it. We have a link to it on federalnewsnetwork.com to make it easy, but here's a quick summary, Terry. It directs several agencies, including CISA, NIST, and NSA, to establish a voluntary system for government to evaluate advanced frontier AI models for cybersecurity risks before they're released publicly. Now, this framework needs to be in place in about 60 days. Under the framework, AI developers can emphasize or recommended to provide the government with access to the frontier models 30 days before they release the models to every other organization. The EO also directs the Treasury Department, working with NSA, CISA, and other agencies, to form a quote-unquote cybersecurity clearinghouse. Now, what this group will do is work with AI industry, critical infrastructure operators to coordinate on new software vulnerabilities, as well as prioritize patching and remediation of those vulnerabilities. Now, when you look at the entire EO and all, CISA is mentioned 5 times. Nick Anderson is the acting director of CISA and describes the role the agency will play in very broad terms.
When we start thinking about artificial intelligence security, there's a couple of different buckets. We think about working with frontier model companies and how do we ensure the security of the model themselves. How do we start talking about, the safety conversation that goes into that and what is potential risk with the model? Then we start talking about how can we actually use it as a force for good? How can we use it as a good defensive tool? And how is it going to both help us to reduce attack surface exposure? And then how can we actually use it in our operational needs day to day? And then we've got the third bucket of what to expect when you're expecting. How do we help provide advice to people on how to govern their own enterprises and how to think about things like data risk as they look to adopt artificial intelligence? So CISA is going to have a foot in every single one of those broad buckets, whether it is the clearinghouse type initiatives or it's going to be access to the models themselves, or again, how we're going to use them to so quickly help to drive down some of this tech debt that we've got.
Anderson, speaking at the TechNet Cyber Conference Wednesday, sponsored by FCA, says this tech debt that every agency really is dealing with is the larger problem in securing AI models, but also the data and applications from AI attacks. He says for too long, agencies have, quote unquote, kicked the can down the road when it comes to getting off these legacy systems that, Terry, are harder to protect and secure.
So, Jason, tech debt's been a conversation for a while. Is that really part of the reason why the EO calls for CISA to issue this binding operational directive?
I think, Terry, that's a really good way to connect the dots, right? What Nick Anderson's saying, what the EO is calling for. And basically what we do know is this. Within 30 days, the EO says CISA will issue one or more BODs and other guidance to do several things. One thing it will do is expedite and prioritize cyber defense of civil federal systems. CISA also will establish and expand the federal programs and cybersecurity services that enhance AI-enabled defensive tools. And then finally, the EO says CISA will facilitate access to these cybersecurity tools and services, including, where appropriate, what would they call these covered frontier models for agencies, state and local authorities, critical infrastructure operators, including people like rural hospitals, community banks, and local utilities. Now, Anderson offered a little bit more insight around this upcoming BOD.
We're going to be rolling out, before the end of the week, some specific artificial intelligence platform access for our federal government-wide partners. We're going to be rolling out binding operational directives that are going to focus on vulnerability remediation and vulnerability management way forward, for our extended enterprise. And we've got, folks that are right here working as part of the cyber committee that are, here from CISA that are helping to modernize the approach that we're managing overall, federal security risk and how we're looking at our risk profile associated with system authorizations. All of these different elements fit together again into that. How do we integrate our government and how do we integrate our industry approaches in order to be able to deliver a more resilient enterprise?
Now, I caught up with Anderson after his speech and said, hey, what else you tell me about the BOD or BODs? And he said, there's not much more at this time, but obviously, Terry, we know that they could be coming as soon as today, maybe next week. Now, interestingly enough, the BODs really stood out to several industry folks, too, who commented on the AI executive order. Yijing Zhang is the vice president of government affairs at Abnormal AI. And Yijing says in an email statement that the BODs are really a marker. Zhang says the defense of our nation's vital functions will be carried out at speed and scale that only modern AI native capabilities can deliver. He says that in isolation, that there's a coherent modernization agenda that follows OMB's also recent memo on logging, addressing how agencies log cybersecurity data. Now, he goes, the through line is clear. The federal enterprise is moving away from collecting vast reservoirs of raw data that later need to be stitched together and more toward this idea of looking at the surface and where those holes are, cybersecurity challenges are, and dealing with it themselves. So I think, Terry, we'll see today, maybe early next week, what those BOD or BODs will tell us. But again, I think that the concern is real about agencies getting attacked by AI-fueled cyber adversaries, and they need to do something about it much more quickly.
To that point, Jason, do we know anything about how CISA is planning to help agencies secure their AI and be prepared for those kind of attacks?
Now, you heard Anderson talk about this new platform for agencies to access. And actually, I caught up with him after his speech and said, hey, if you can't tell me more about the BODs, what can you tell me about the platform?
One of the initial focus areas for us is going to be on how do we provide the right sort of platform for these types of AI capabilities to make them broadly available for federal civilian executive branch especially, so we can take advantage of the defensive capability it's going to give us access to and the ability to be able to manage that vulnerability environment that we see.
People think platform as like, oh, I go to a place and I get this, or like, what should we look for? Is that going to be public? Is it something that a vendor can see or that I can see, or is it more like behind the...
I think it's still going to be in flight right now as we continue to define that. I mean, the biggest focus for us right now is going to be how do we take that information about the attack surface and how do we take that information about vulnerability management, how do we put that in the hands of folks who can actually remediate that and start to buy down some of that risk on the federal civilian executive branch side, especially for our mission at first. And then how do we continue to build those partnerships as we continue to see this expand and evolve? Because we've been having the conversation primarily about a single vendor in the space and a single AI capability within the space. We're just going to continue to see American technology companies innovate on this and make capability that's going to continue to be greater. It's going to continue to exceed those benchmarks that we've seen. So really it's about building that repeatable process going into the future and not just a single point in time, a single tool, a single capability.
Now, Terry, he's referring to the Mythos, the Claude Mythos discovery from a few weeks ago that really drove a lot of this effort, really drove a lot of concern across the community about finding vulnerabilities that have been around for years that nobody knew about. So I think, Terry, there's more to come on the new platform, more to come on the BOD or BODs, and obviously CISA has plenty to do over the next few months between the EO and, of course, the new logging memo from OMB, where it has to develop or update an architecture for that agencies can follow around logging. Now, real quick, one piece of related news, and our colleague Justin Doubleday reported that DHS Secretary Markwayne Mullen recognized before the House Homeland Security Committee hearing on Wednesday that CISA needs more people, right? This BOD, this EO, this OMB memo is putting a lot of pressure on the agency. And Mullen says the agency needs to hire hundreds of additional staff to get to about 2,800 employees that he believes is necessary to carry out the mission. CISA staff has dropped from about 3,400 people before the beginning of the Trump administration to about 2,200 today.
They certainly are going to have their hands full.
Without a doubt, and I have a strong feeling we will see a lot more effort by CISA, a lot more from them in the coming weeks. And of course, if they put out that BOD, we will be reporting on it. That's
Federal News Network's executive editor, Jason Miller. Jason, thanks for joining me.
Always a pleasure.
You can find his story at federalnewsnetwork.com. Up next, GSA updated the organizational structure of the Federal Acquisition Service on paper, but now the real work begins. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network.
Tune in Tuesdays at 10:30 a.m. and 2:30 p.m. for the Innovation in Government Show, sponsored by Carasoft. Hear from the industry leaders advancing the technologies shaping how agencies modernize secure operations and deliver better services. Innovation in Government covers what is changing now, what is working from cybersecurity and cloud to data, AI, and emerging technologies. Listen to Innovation in Government, Tuesdays at 10:30 a.m. and 2:30 p.m. on Federal News Network. Search Innovation in Government.
Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. For the last decade, the General Services Administration organized its Federal Acquisition Service around the concepts of category management. But over the last few years, GSA leaders realized agencies were buying products and services much differently, and it was time for a change. For more details on the FAS reorganization and how the agency will measure its success, Federal News Network's executive editor Jason Miller caught up with Laura Stanton, the acting commissioner of GSA's Federal Acquisition Service.
ASSIST is the Office of Assisted Acquisition Services. So that's really the assisted acquisition services that we had before. They went through a big reorg about 24 months ago or so. And so we didn't make a lot of changes there. They're going to continue to deliver that highly specialized bespoke contracting expertise that they're so well known for, offer the surge support, tailored acquisition solutions when agencies need that additional capacity. And it really preserves the flexibility that we need when agencies have those highly complex requirements and mission-specific needs. Centralize is really our newest business area, and this is the Office of Centralized Acquisition Services. This is being led by Tom Myron. By the way, ASSIST is being led by Pete Burr. Tom is leading a procurement consolidation for common goods and services across the government. This is an opt-in. We've often gotten from agencies over the years, we've gotten a lot of requests. Can you guys do smaller acquisitions than what the Assisted Acquisition Service delivers? And this is our answer, is we've worked with SBA and OPM to bring over their acquisition, but we have over 50 sort of agencies, sub-agencies, small commissions who we're supporting their acquisition on today. And this is really working to simplify acquisition and expanding shared acquisition services across the government and brings GSA into a new area where we just hadn't done a lot of support for those smaller dollar value acquisitions when somebody really needs that task order expertise and support. We have then Create, which is led by Larry Hale. This is the Office of Acquisition Solutions Development. And this is really where everything starts in the acquisition cycle. They're looking at building the big government-wide contracts. They have the multiple awards schedules sitting in that portfolio. So they're looking always at how do they design and develop the next generation of acquisition solutions and category strategies. So a lot of the category management is sitting in here as well. And also, how do we keep all of the ones we have running smoothly for all of the customers that use it? This includes, there's been a lot of talk about the OneGov program. So this includes the OneGov program. I mentioned MASS already, Oasis Plus, Alliant 3, Polaris, and all of our telecommunications contracts, including EIS. So they're also focused a lot on innovation, emerging technologies, commercial acquisition strategies, and understanding where the government needs to be going and what suppliers do we need to be bringing into the government in order to make sure that we remain on top of technology and professional services as the commercial markets continue to evolve. The next office is Deliver, the Office of Shared Services Delivery, which is run by Jeff Lau. And that is where we consolidated all of our shared services. Previously, the shared services had been scattered throughout the different portfolios. We had the Smart Pay, we had US Access, which provides support for over 1 million government PIV cards, and also the Federal Public Key Infrastructure. They have the fleet program, both the automotive buying in this case, and the fleet leasing program, which supports over 230,000 vehicles across the federal government, and also our global supply program. So they are truly focused on providing those services directly to the end user customers. This was an opportunity to look at sharing best practices in shared service delivery, operational consistency, and really driving customer experience at scale. The final portfolio is run by Mark Lee, Optimize, and it's the Office of Business Optimization. And they're going to be optimizing truly on how do we make sure that everything is handled consistently across these four business portfolios? How do we drive continuous improvement across the Federal Acquisition Service? How do we need to continue to modernize our IT systems, strengthen the governance, strengthen enterprise decision-making, and also ensure that all of us remain efficient, measurable, and adapt over time. So they're doing a lot of the internal support. They also have some of our external customer-facing functions as well. So our former customer accounts and stakeholder engagement office, a number of people from there have now migrated into the optimized portfolio, including some of those market research tools. So that's sort of the FAST 2.0 in a really quick snapshot.
If we talk about this in a year from now, are there certain things that you're saying, hey, this is what we hope to see that's different? This is how we're delivering services differently or better or more efficiently? And are there some metrics you are really kind of, at least initial metrics that you're using to say that's going to be hey, we were successful, we were not as successful as we thought we were, or hey, this was a surprise? Where are we in a year from now? How are you kind of visioning that out?
Let's start with the basics. Let's start with the anecdotal. I would like people to say, look, since you guys reorganized, it's been easier for me to get this, for industry to tell us that they've seen more consistency in how we engage with them, in the decisions that we're making, that we're able to build on the different programs more effective. So that's certainly a big part of it. I'm also looking for the employee engagement, that the employees see career opportunities, and that they also are seeing how that they align to the larger FAST mission that we're doing, and pulling and seeing high levels of employee engagement. That would certainly be a couple of things that I would be looking for changes. On the customer side, I want it to be easier for them to figure out where do they get support. One of the things that is both a strength and a weakness at the same time is that we have had so many programs, and I think sometimes it becomes a little bit, we had an opportunity to really make it clear how do you engage with FAST and how do you get the necessary support. And the new organizational structure, we've been talking about what the customer journey looks like. And we actually started last summer to do work on the customer journey and helping us make some of the organizational decisions that we needed to make on placement of where different programs should be based on how we anticipated customers would engage with us. So those would certainly be some of the key things that I'm looking for. On some of the more internal aspects of it, I would like to see the business processes smoothed out, and also the IT development and the new IT systems coming online faster. So I think lots of opportunity, really excited about where we're heading in the next year.
Laura Stanton is the Acting Commissioner of the Federal Acquisition Service at the General Services Administration, speaking there with Federal News Network's Executive Editor, Jason Miller. Find the full interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/askthecio. Still to come, when it comes to inflation, playing it safe isn't always the safest investment. But first, CMMC has moved from planning to enforcement, and contractors are feeling it. You're listening to The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. After years of preparation, cybersecurity requirements for defense contractors are now being enforced in real time. That shift is exposing gaps between what companies thought was ready and what actually meets the standard. Here to walk through what he's seeing inside the defense supply chain is Emil Sayegh, CEO of Cybersheath. Mr. Sayegh, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you so much, Terry. It's great to be here, and I'm very thankful to you and to your listeners for inviting me here.
You have a lot of background on a very important topic, CMMC. In fact, your company received quite a bit of attention last fall when you released a report that found only 1% of defense contractors said they felt ready for the CMMC rules that were just then going into effect. We're about 6 months later. How have you seen the situation change?
There's certainly a rush from certain contractors and subcontractors to essentially become CMMC compliant, get certified, get assessed, and so on and so forth. But what we've seen from before, for multiple years, as CMMC was being talked about and planned, basically CMMC's moved from planning and PowerPoint and Excel sheets and Word document and project plans to actual implementation now, and people are starting to take it much more seriously. So it's moved basically from writing the policy to actually implementing those policies, and not only implementing them, but also making sure that you have the proper evidence that those policies are implemented. Because when an assessor is going to come in and audit you, or even if you're doing a self-assessment and you're publishing an SPRS score, there's a threshold of evidence that you need to maintain, and that's what needs to go into your self-assessment, right? It can't just be, I think, or we planned, or it looks good on an Excel document or a Word document. You have to be able to provide the evidence so that you can enter your SPRS score in the government system, the DoD system. So having said that, I think we're seeing everything shift from planning to now being part of the operational workflows in companies, and people are starting to take it seriously.
I guess there's really two sides to the readiness question. One is whether the contractors inside the defense industrial base were themselves ready. The other side is whether the Department of Defense was ready to hold folks accountable. So from the contractor's perspective, what are they seeing from DoD on the enforcement side?
Sure. Look, it's less frankly, about some dramatic government action. It usually basically starts quietly through contracting friction, through signaling from their contracting officer. The subcontractor will probably start seeing some pressure from the contractor, from the primes, right? So we've seen a lot of publicity about that, where primes are essentially pushing those requirements onto their subcontractors and asking them to be CMMC compliant, quote unquote, by a certain date. Some dates are sooner than what we've heard from the government, which has some people, kind of questioning that. But I do think that there is a push for that. So I think it starts, pretty quietly at first. It starts to appear in a contract, or impetus from a contracting officer, or from the prime down to their subcontractors, basically.
And are the subcontractors in this space surprised at this point by the flow down of this requirement, or were they expecting it?
That's a great question, and I chuckle a little bit. I mean, CMMC's been around for a while. It's been talked about for a long time. Nobody should be surprised at this point. The surprise, I would say, is some people did not know that they were handling, or they will be handling CUI data. Some subcontractors did not know that this is going to be a requirement by the contractor that they be compliant by a certain date. So I do think that there's a few subcontractors that probably assumed that because they were sole source, somehow they get an exemption, and certainly none of those are true. There are no exemptions, and come November 10th, 2026, and they're going to have to be compliant to still be eligible for contract award, as well as new contract award, as well as existing contracts that they're in. So,
Emil Sayegh is CEO of Cybersheath. Mr. Sayegh, as the market is helping contractors get compliant, one of the concerns from the beginning was the number and availability of the validators, the third-party validators. What are you seeing play out there?
Absolutely. There's 80,000 contractors and subcontractors that need to be CMMC compliant, and there's only 100 C3PAOs, third-party auditors, in this space. So there's definitely a mismatch between human capacity to do these assessments and the number of contractors, subcontractors that need to become compliant. But also, I would say it's not just the assessors, but also the partners to these contractors and subcontractors that are getting them ready, that are helping them become ready to be CMMC compliant, that are coming in, doing the IT work, doing the cybersecurity work, putting all the compliance documentation in place, processes, and so on and so forth. There's a shortage of those as well. So there's a shortage on the readiness side, and there's a shortage on the assessment side. And further, what's been accentuating all this is what you've asked me earlier in the interview about is, are contractors, subcontractors taking this seriously and not waiting to the last minute? What we're seeing is a lot of firms that are waiting to the last minute. They're coming to us now, 6 months away from the November 10th deadline, wanting to be compliant by the November 10th, 2026 deadline. And that's a tall order. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. It is still, within the window, but is really stretching it. Everything has to go right for companies to be certified by then. So you're seeing this nexus of factors that are happening all at the same time that are creating a urgency as well as a shortage of human capital to be able to execute on these plans.
So if the market is not capable of getting everybody through all of the credentialing that they need to be compliant by the implementation date in November, what happens? Do contractors not perform? Do we just move forward with known gaps? What's going to happen in November?
Sure. I mean, they have a period of time to cure, for sure, the deficiencies. And also, we just have to keep in mind that not all 80,000 plus 1,000 contractors, 80,000 contractors don't all have to be compliant by November 10th. The contractors that have contracts that require CMMC compliance, those have to be compliant. There are subcontractors that also have to be compliant. And then as new contracts get published and have the CMMC clause in it, then the contractors that want to bid on those new contracts also have to be compliant at that time. So there's a sequencing. Out of the 80,000, the government estimates about 8,000 have to be compliant within the first year, so the year that we're in now. So we're about 1,200 now. So there's a delta of about 6,800 contractors, subcontractors that are somehow still trying to get through it. And we're adding about 200, close to actually 180 certifications per month as an industry. So we're making progress, and hopefully by the deadline, the most critical companies would have gotten their certifications, and the one that have not either will have plans to remediate within a certain short period of time, or they would have an alternative to those companies and those contracts.
There's talk that these kinds of requirements may extend across the rest of the federal government beyond DoD. How does what you're seeing now in the defense sector inform you about how federal cyber mandates might play out more broadly? What would you expect to see?
I mean, we've seen it in the GSA with their announcement about a CMMC-like requirement. And I do think that this is the right move. CMMC is a great ecosystem. Creating a new standard is hard because you got to create an ecosystem around it. You got to create auditors. You got to create readiness, a readiness industry, whether it's software, whether it's hardware, whether it's services that come in and help these companies get ready. So I'm very encouraged with what the GSA has done, and I expect that to transcend the entire federal ecosystem, if you will. And this is really about protecting mission critical information and frankly strengthening supply chain resilience to improve our national security readiness. This is what this is all about. Our adversaries, our foreign adversaries, are definitely have been taking some of our most precious IP in this country. And I think the Defense Department, Department of War, has decided to draw a hard line and put these deadlines in place. And we're going to start seeing other federal agencies follow suit.
I've been speaking with Emil Sayegh. He is CEO of Cybersheath. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Of course. Thank you so much, Terry.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Coming up next, when it comes to inflation, playing it safe isn't always the safest investment. This is the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. For federal employees and retirees, inflation is changing the math on everything from retirement income to basic saving strategy. Some of the choices that feel conservative, like leaning on the G Fund or sitting on cash, can actually fall behind over time. Art Stein joins me now to walk through how inflation is affecting federal financial security. Art, thanks so much for joining me today. It's great to see you.
Thank you, Terry. Good to see you again.
Certainly one of the financial topics that is a almost daily headline is the inflation numbers. We hear it from the Fed. We hear Congress thinking about affordability. We hear it in terms of the president's approval numbers. But when we talk about inflation from your perspective, what does it actually mean instead of just its shorthand?
Well, inflation, the shorthand definition is it's just the increase in the cost of goods and services in the United States. And that determines our cost of living, which is a slightly separate definition. But when inflation goes up, for most people, their cost of living goes up. If your wages, if your salary is increasing the same amount or even more, then that may not bother you. But if it's not, then you have a problem. And the problem for FERS retirees is that their annuity, their pension, their annuity does not fully compensate for inflation anytime inflation is greater than 2%. And that over, a long retirement could be devastating. And it forces many FERS retirees not only to have to withdraw increasing amounts of money from their investments, primarily their TSP for most retirees, and that may not be sustainable for them.
So let's just put that in practical terms, because I think a lot of times people think about inflation and it's a feeling, it's a vibe. It's things are feeling much more expensive. My money doesn't go as far as it used to. But when you're on an annuity as your primary source of income, and you said FERS is indexed at 2%, inflation's been running considerably above that. How does that play out in people's lives? What sort of choices are they making?
Well, the choices they have to make, and let me just say one thing. The inflation adjustment for FERS is not fixed at 2%. If inflation's more than 3%, the cost of living adjustment is going to be whatever the inflation rate is minus 1%. And if it's between 2 and 3, then it's just fixed at 2, as you said. Problem is we're seeing inflation higher than 3%. I mean, this year, inflation rate in April was 3.8%, and it was 3.3% in February. So FERS retirees are getting that minus 1%. So what people end up doing is they have to make choices. One choice is to take more money from their retirement from their investments of all types, including bank accounts. And the other choice is just to consume less, to purchase less, to do fewer things, buy cheaper food. Hopefully it doesn't get to the point where they have to buy less food, but they might have to buy cheaper food. I mean, we've seen a huge increase in the price of beef for various reasons, and so people are eating less beef. We've seen a huge increase in gasoline prices, and presumably, people are driving less, although in the United States, driving is kind of pretty fixed in with people. So some people will drive less, but a lot of people just keep on driving.
So if folks are drawing from that FERS retirement and as their principal source of income, what should they be thinking about? Are there different allocation strategies that might mitigate the impacts of inflation on their available balances?
Yeah, so with the TSP, a common mistake that people make is long-term investments, all in the G fund. Or a majority of the money in the G fund. And even the L funds make the same mistake. They're very heavily invested in stocks in the beginning, but starting about 10 years before they mature, they become way too invested in bonds, and they end up, the L income fund has about 67% of everyone's investments in the G fund and another 5 or 6% in the F fund. And the problem with those funds is once you take into account taxes and inflation, they lose purchasing power. So it's very misleading because, if you have money, say, in the G fund, every year you just see that amount increase a little bit, assuming you're not putting money in or taking it out. And you think, great, it's going up in value, but it's not. The purchasing power is going down. The dollar value is going up. And those are two very different things. And so, people have a lot of money in those funds. They're in for a rude shock in 10 or 20 years because all of a sudden they're realizing, oh, hey, I have to take out more and more money from the G and the F fund to maintain my purchasing power.
Art Stein is a certified financial planner with Arthur Stein Financial. Art, what's a smarter way to do it then? Should people broaden the asset classes that they're invested in?
Okay, so let me just also say there are two other mistakes that are very common that people need to watch out for. One is paying off their mortgage early. And the problem with that is that equity in your home and paying off your mortgage early increases the equity you have in your home. The equity in your home has a 0% rate of return. If the price of the home doesn't change, the value of the equity does not change. Now, if the price of the house goes up, equity is going to go up, but that's a rate of return on the house. The equity is not really, generating interest or dividends or capital gains. And it's hard to use the equity in your home. It's locked in various ways. Also, too much money in bank accounts is a mistake because, once again, bank accounts lose money to taxes and inflation. So what people need to do is to realize that historically, only stocks have had a high enough rate of return in a well-managed, well-diversified portfolio. Only stocks have had a high enough rate of return to increase purchasing power after taking into account taxes and inflation. And that means the C and the S and the I fund. And I feel like the TSP recognizes this because the L funds, in the beginning, they're very heavily invested in stocks. The new ones are about 99% stocks for the first 10 years, and they don't even get down to 60% until about 10 years before they mature. But then they over-invest in bonds when they become the L income fund. So what I would say is, one, make sure you continue to have a solid amount invested in stocks. If you are looking for a long retirement, don't pay off the mortgage early. Invest that money. Everybody can have an outside investment account. Make sure you have a good emergency fund. So maybe use it for that. And don't end up with too much in bank accounts because all of those hurt you when we take into account inflation and taxes.
Art, it almost seems like you're turning conventional investment advice, and I'll use my air quotes here, on its head because people have been told that equities are risky, that you really should pay off your mortgage so that you don't run a risk there. How should people think about this balance between risk and return when they are in their retirement years?
Okay. Terry, the thing is, there are lots of investment risks. One of them is volatility. And bonds are much less volatile than stocks. No question about it. And bank accounts really don't have any volatility. But other investment risks The major one for long-term investors is losing purchasing power because of taxes and inflation. So people should not say that bonds are safer. They should say that bonds are less volatile. They are safer in that one way, but they are riskier in terms of losing purchasing power to taxes and inflation. Stocks are more volatile, but they have historically had a much higher rate of return for people who are patient and willing to put up with major stock market declines, which, hey, they're going to happen. We haven't had a stock crash in, a while, and there's one in our future. I mean, I know it's going to happen, but we need to just be patient when that happens and hold on. And historically, that has worked out for people. Past performance is no guarantee of future performance. Certainly, there are reasons to think that stock returns in the future will not be as high as in the past. And I don't know what's going to happen, but I don't disagree with, the fact that there are reasons to think that. But I haven't heard anybody say that stock returns are going to be lower than bond returns over long periods of time.
Art Stein is a certified financial planner with Arthur Stein Financial. Art, thanks as always for keeping our minds open to better financial planning advice.
Thank you very much, Barry.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Hear the Federal Drive on demand. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. The Forest Service is offering separation incentives to employees ahead of an agency reorganization that will move hundreds of positions across the country. The Forest Service told employees in a recent email that it will offer Voluntary Early Retirement Authority, or VERA, and Voluntary Separation Incentive Payments, VSIP, to employees impacted by the agency's upcoming reorganization. The Agriculture Department announced in March that the Forest Service would move its headquarters to Salt Lake City, Utah. Federal News Network's Jory Heckman is here with more details. Jory, thanks for joining me.
Hey, Terry. Great to be here.
I feel like we've tackled this story in bits and pieces, but step back and put it all together for us. What changes are happening to the Forest Service?
Yeah, so you mentioned the headquarters move. That's the one that's gotten the most attention here, but there are a couple of other pieces going on here. The Forest Service is also looking to shutter its 9 regional offices, and so far only has plans to keep 20 of its 77 research facilities. The status of those remaining 50-plus facilities is unclear at this point. And one other thing is that the Forest Service is also looking to merge its wildland firefighting capabilities with the Interior Department and have those all exist in one single agency. So those are all the different components, but they will be rolling out in different phases.
There's a lot of moving pieces there, but let's talk then about the moving pieces. What about employees who don't want to relocate? Are they being offered any incentives here?
Yeah, so like you said in the lead here, Terry, they are being offered one of 2 incentives here, early retirements or buyouts that can be worth up to $25,000. That's the federal cap right now. And what's being said to employees, those who are eligible, this isn't eligible to everyone exactly, people who are on the hook for these potential relocations. What's being described here from the Forest Service chief is that there is a position for everyone at the Forest Service, but it may not be where that position currently is now. And so understanding that may be a hardship for people who are mid-career or senior career employees, giving them an opportunity to part ways with the agency on amicable terms here, rather than facing the hardship of uprooting yourself and your family to move to an entirely new state across the country.
Is this decision a done deal, or are there parts of it that might yet be revisited, so it's too early for people to make those formal or final decisions?
That's an interesting question. I think you could couch that in the it depends bucket for a couple of things here. Congress, of course, controls the power of the purse, can decide what these agencies can and can't spend the money on. However, Chief Schultz has told members of Congress in committee hearings that he's of the opinion, and USDA leadership is of the opinion, that this secretary, the Agriculture Secretary, Brooke Rollins, has the authority to carry out these reorganizations as she feels is necessary to best serve the agency. So there's that piece of things. They seem to be going ahead with the relocations with or without Congress's blessing. But there is, on the wildland firefighting part of things, they are looking for Congress's input on that. Just to give you a bit of a recap, for the fiscal 2026 spending bill, lawmakers didn't go ahead with this Interior USDA wildland fire merging proposal. They said, we think we need more outside research on this. So they required the parties involved to commission a third-party study to see whether there are pros and cons to this plan and whether the pros outweigh the cons. So the Forest Service is actually on the street right now looking for vendors to carry out that research proposal. And so once the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted, they expect to spend about 6 months doing that research. And so that brings us to around November, when they would have that research paper available to all parties involved, including Congress. And so Schultz said that Congress should be able to have an opportunity to read that and offer up their thoughts before proceeding with a fiscal 2027 spending deal.
The timing on that is curious, since we're kind of entering wildland fire season right now. Are they saying that they need to hold on the moves related to the firefighting services until they get that study in November?
Correct. Yeah, the Forest Service has been really adamant that no changes to wildland firefighting, any of the wildland firefighters or the employees who carry red cards, meaning that they aren't day-to-day firefighters. That's not their day-to-day job description, but they have other roles at the Forest Service, but can be tapped to be wildland firefighters in emergencies. None of those employees are going to be asked to do anything as far as relocations. I think they're broadly out of that bucket of reorganizations. The people who are being asked to move are, more of an administrative function. They are headquarters employees for the case of the Salt Lake City move. So wildland fire, no one's being asked to move anywhere. They're relatively untouched. What they're being asked to do is really more of a restructuring of the org chart than anything else.
And Jory, what would the timeline be for the other parts of this reorganization and relocation? Is it imminent, or do people have months, or is this a multi-year process that's going to unfold?
I think we'll learn more by the end of this calendar year of where things lie. Of course, this is part of a much broader USDA reorganization where USDA, for example, is moving about half of its headquarters employees to 5 hubs across the country, really shrinking its presence in the Beltway area. And that's going to be a really big reimagining of their footprint as well. So generally speaking, all signs point to the end of this calendar year as to what those next steps look like, whether Congress is on board or not. So stay tuned.
It's Federal News Network's Jory Heckman. Jory, thanks for bringing us the story.
Thanks, Terry.
You can find his full story at federalnewsnetwork.com. The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton is produced by Eric White and Michelle Sandiford. Our web editor is Stephanie Wright. Are you shaping cloud policy, leading IT modernization efforts, or trying to deliver secure, reliable services? Join Federal News Network's Virtual Cloud Exchange June 10th and 11th for timely insights into how agencies are moving from cloud adoption to cloud optimization. Register today at federalnewsnetwork.com. For the latest updates, stay with federalnewsnetwork.com or follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. I'm Terry Gerton. Thanks for listening.